Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where every bead of sweat matters, and every crack in the ground tells a story. The air is hot, so hot that it seems to hum in your ears, and the earth under your feet is split into a patchwork of jagged lines, as though the ground itself has been stitched together badly and is starting to come undone. Above you, the sky is a pale, stubborn blue, not a cloud in sight, like someone painted it that way and forgot to add the rain. You probably won't survive long here without learning the customs of the locals, because in this place, surviving. The dry season isn't just about storing grain, it's about convincing the skies themselves to take pity on you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location and the local time down in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along a narrow path that crunches under your sandals. Tiny shards of baked clay breaking with every step. The village ahead isn't much, half a dozen mud brick houses, their walls faded to the color of old bone, and roofs that sag slightly under the weight of woven reeds. The smell is a strange blend of dust, smoke, and the faint sourness of grain, kept too long in storage. A pair of goats watches you from the shade of a fig tree, chewing in slow, deliberate motions, their eyes half-lidded against the glare. This place is holding its breath. You can feel it in the stillness. No one lingers outside without purpose. Every action is deliberate, aimed at conserving energy in the heat. A woman sweeps the front of her doorway, her broom more a bundle of brittle twigs than anything else. Each sweep sending little clouds of dust swirling before they settle again, almost exactly where they started. Somewhere, a child laughs once, short and sharp, then falls silent, as if reminded of the gravity of the day. The drought isn't new here. In fact, the people have lived with its ebb and flow for longer than anyone can remember. This time, the rains have been absent for so long that the elders have decided it's time to turn to the rain caller. Every village has one, sometimes a man, sometimes a woman, sometimes someone whose voice is as dry and cracked as the land they live on, but whose words are said to hold power over the clouds. Historians still argue whether these figures were true shamans, priests in disguise, or simply the most persuasive people in town. But for the villagers, the distinction doesn't matter. What matters is the result. You're told the rain caller will appear at sundown once the heat softens just enough for the ritual to begin. Until then, you wander, noticing the quiet protective charms tucked into corners. A clay figurine half buried near the well. A bundle of dried herbs hanging above a doorframe. A faint spiral etched into the mud wall of the meeting hut. These aren't decorations. They're quiet conversations with unseen forces. Reminders that people here live in two worlds at once. One you can see, and one you can only hope to influence. An old man passes you, balancing a pot of water on his head. The pot is barely half full, and the way he guards it with one hand tells you how precious it is. He glances toward the empty horizon, mutters something you can't catch, and disappears into his home. You stand there for a moment, wondering whether the mutter was a prayer or a complaint. Either could fit. The sun dips lower, its light shifting from blinding white to a molten gold that sets the dust glowing in the air. You can hear the faint rustle of movement now, people emerging from their shaded corners. Somewhere behind you, someone starts a low, steady hum, just a sound at first, but it spreads, picked up by another voice, and then another, until it threads through the village like a warm breeze. It's not the ritual yet, not officially. Think of it as stretching before a long run, except instead of loosening muscles, they're loosening the air, coaxing it into readiness. There's a strange comfort in the sound, even if you don't know the words. It's the sound of people trying together, of not giving up even when the sky has ignored them for weeks. As you settle onto the worn step of an empty house, you notice a few villagers glance upward as though they've heard something you haven't. You follow their gaze, but the sky is still blank and merciless. No clouds, no relief. Just the knowledge that soon the rain caller will step forward with their tools, their chants, and their hope. And here, hope is as tangible as the dust clinging to your skin. Asterisk, the sun slips lower, and the gold of late afternoon begins to deepen into a coppery glow. The heat has finally begun to loosen its grip, but the air is still heavy, as if weighed down by expectation. You can hear the shuffle of feet, nows, low, deliberate steps as villagers make their way toward the open space. At the edge of the settlement, it's not quite a plaza, just a bare patch of hard-packed earth surrounded by a semicircle of low, crumbling walls, but it serves the purpose. It's where the rain caller works. You follow along, keeping to the back of the gathering, and notice that people avoid stepping on the bare center of the clearing. Their feet skirt its edges like a river flowing around a rock. The ground there is darker, smoother, as if worn down by generations of careful attention. Historians still argue whether such spaces were considered sacred from the very beginning, or if they simply became sacred after decades of repeated rituals. Either way, the villagers treat it with the kind of respect usually reserved for the oldest person in the room. The rain caller is already there, waiting. Tonight, it's a wiry woman with hair the color of storm clouds. If storm clouds had been faded by years in the sun, she wears a long tunic dyed in muted indigo, a color that must have been costly once, though now it's patched in places with russet and ochre cloth. Around her neck hangs a cord threaded with beads, shells, and the occasional object you can't quite identify. Some are carved wood, others smooth and glassy like river stones, and one looks suspiciously like the polished tooth of something much larger than you'd ever want to meet in the dark in her hands. She carries a bowl of water so clear it looks impossible, as though it's been pulled straight from the heart of a glacier. The sight of it makes your throat tighten with thirst. A boy follows behind her with a small wicker basket, the contents hidden beneath a square of woven cloth. Every so often he glances at it nervously, like he's carrying something alive that might not stay put. The villagers form a wide ring around the center, their eyes fixed on the woman. You feel a subtle shift in the air, like the moment before a concert begins, when the audience collectively leans forward. She kneels in the middle, setting the bowl gently on the earth. With her fingers, she dips into the water and flicks droplets outward, tiny arcs catching the last light. It's more than symbolic. In her mind, this is the first rain, the first reminder to the sky that it can, in fact, still weep from the basket. The boy produces a handful of strange items, a small bundle of feathers bound with twine, a coil of dried vines, and what appears to be a piece of cloth embroidered with spirals in faded blue thread. Each item is placed carefully in a semicircle before the woman, as though setting a table for unseen guests. You can almost hear your modern brain trying to categorize these ritual tools, folk art, maybe even props, but here, they're none of those things. Here, they are the language in which one speaks to the weather. The chant begins quietly. Her voice is low and steady, the kind of sound you could almost mistake for wind through tall grass. But as she repeats the phrases, the rhythm changes, picking up, then slowing like a tide teasing the shoreline. You don't recognize the words? It might not even belong to any living language. Historians still argue whether these chants were inherited exactly as they were centuries ago, or reshaped by each generation's rain caller, slowly evolving like water wearing away stone. The people around you begin to join in, not all at once, but in layers, one voice after another. A child's high-pitched hum threads between the deeper tones of the elders. Someone beats a slow rhythm on an overturned pot. The sound grows until it seems to echo against the bare sky. You wonder if this is what the clouds hear, miles above. Not desperation exactly, but insistence. You notice a detail, then the rain caller's feet. She has drawn them slightly apart, toes dug into the packed earth. With each rise and fall of her voice, she shifts her weight subtly, as if grounding herself not just physically, but spiritually. It's a dance so small you'd miss it if you weren't watching closely. And yet it feels essential. So the sky won't listen unless her whole body is part of the request. The smell changes too. At first, it's just dust and the faint temps of sweat from the gathered crowd. But then you catch something sharper, resin, maybe, or the scent of leaves crushed underfoot. You realize someone has lit a small brazier at the edge of the clearing. Thin tendrils of smoke curl upward, pale against the deepening twilight, carrying the scent skyward as an offering. It goes on for what feels like hours, though you suspect it's less. The chanting, the swaying, the smoke all of it, blurring into a kind of trance. You stop thinking about whether it will work and start feeling as though you're already inside the rain. Your skin tingles as if touched by the memory of cool drops. Your eyes keep drifting upward, scanning the horizon for the faintest smudge of gray. And just when you think the ritual is over, the rain caller bends low, scoops water from the bowl, and drinks. The crowd exhales audibly, as if a collective breath had been held the entire time. She stands, tilts her face to the sky, and smiles faintly. Whether it's from satisfaction, exhaustion, or something only she understands. You can't tell above. The sky remains stubbornly clear, but you feel different, lighter, like you've been part of something that matters. Even if the clouds take their time answering asterisk the next morning, the world feels quieter somehow, as though the village is holding its breath to see if the ritual has taken root in the sky. You wake to the smell of damp earth, but it's only from the do-not-yet the downpour everyone hopes for. The air has that crisp edge that comes after a long night of cooling. And in the half-light of dawn, the houses look softer, their thatch. Roofs beaded with tiny droplets that glisten like glass. You make your way toward the edge of the settlement where a narrow stream winds its lazy way past low, grassy banks. It's here that the rain caller walks each morning after a ceremony, not to fetch water that's someone else's chore, but to listen to the current. She says the stream can tell her if the rain will come soon. Historians still argue whether this was a metaphor, a way of observing subtle changes in wind and moisture, or if the belief truly leaned into the mystical hearing. The voice of water as clearly as one might hear a neighbor. She's there already, crouched low beside the water, her hands hovering over the surface as though she's warming them over a fire. Her reflection shivers in the current, rippling as tiny fish dart beneath. Without looking up, she speaks not to you, but to the water itself in a voice softer than yesterday's chants. It's a whisper, a murmur meant for currents and stones. It's not for human ears. When she stands, she tucks a small sprig of mint into her sash. It's fresh and green, and she must have picked it nearby. Later you'll learn that it's meant as both a charm and a sinif. The mint wilts before sunset. She'll know the weather has turned against her efforts. If it stays lively and fragrant, the chances are better. You can't help but think. It's a bit like checking your phone for the forecast. It's only with more foliage and fewer advertisements. The path back to the village is busy now. People are out early, sweeping the dust from their doorways, feeding chickens, stacking bundles of firewood. You notice that some have small clay pots near their thresholds, each one filled with water and a single floating petal or leaf. Remember seeing them yesterday. But today they feel connected to the ritual like quiet extensions of the rain-caller's work. Each home making its own small offering to the weather. An elderly man waves you over. His hands are calloused, the nails chipped and stained from years of work. And he's weaving a new fence from willow branches. Between the uprights, he's twisted small charms, bits of bone, slivers of colored cloth, and tiny carved figures shaped like birds. Keeps the dry away, he says with a grin, though you're not sure if he's joking. When you ask, he leans closer and says, birds know where the water hides. You invite them, you invite the rain. It's one of those statements that makes perfect sense here, even if it wouldn't in your own kitchen back home. The practical blends so easily with the mystical that you stop trying to separate them. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the strength of the ritual comes from not knowing exactly where. Belief ends and habit begins. Later, you find yourself near the small communal field, where most of the village's crops grow. 8 rows of corn, beans, and squash stretch toward the horizon, each plant hungry for the relief of rain. A group of women is working together, not planting or harvesting, but digging shallow channels between the rows. They move with efficiency, their tools flashing. In the morning light, you overhear one explaining that the channels will help catch the rain when it comes, guiding it to the roots before it can vanish into the soil. It's both simple irrigation and quiet optimism. The act of preparing for something you want badly enough to plan for it in detail, from somewhere beyond the field. The deep clang of a bell rings out slow, deliberate strikes spaced far apart. The sound rolls over the land, startling a few crows into flight. You follow the noise to its source and find a young boy perched on a stool, pulling the rope of a small bronze bell mounted between two posts. His job is to ring it every morning until the rain comes. So the clouds don't forget we're here, he tells you, with a kind of certainty only children and true believers have. By midday, the sun is high and hot, and the mint sprig in the rain-caller's sash still looks fresh. She moves through the village like someone tending invisible threads, stopping at doorways to murmur blessings, pausing at the stream to dip her fingers again, standing in the fields to taste the air. It's not just a ritual, you realize. A constant conversation between her, the people, and the land itself. And then, almost as an afterthought, you notice a change. The horizon looks a touch heavier, a subtle band of gray smudging the bright edge of the sky. It's nothing you'd bet on yet, but in a place like this, even the smallest shift is a promise. Asterisk by the following day. The village feels like it's leaning toward the sky, as though the people themselves are trying to coax the clouds closer. With their very posture, you wake to a soft, muffled quiet. The kind that comes when the air is heavy with moisture that hasn't yet decided whether to fall. It's not raining, not yet, but the scent in the breeze has changed. It's darker, richer like soil that's just waiting for the first fat drops to sink in. You wander to the center of the settlement, where the main gathering space sits, a hard-packed circle of earth surrounded by low wooden benches. Here, the rain-caller stands beside an arrangement that wasn't there yesterday. At its heart is a low table covered in a patchwork cloth, dyed in deep blues and faded purples. On it rests an assortment of items. Some you recognize, others you don't. A clay jug of water, a small bowl filled with ash, several bundles of dried herbs tied with twine, and, curiously, a handful of smooth river stones painted with spirals. She begins her work before the sun has fully climbed above the treetops. The first step is a slow pouring of water from the jug into a shallow wooden basin. The sound of the liquid trickling is surprisingly loud in the still morning, and everyone gathered leans forward slightly, as though listening to the pitch of a note. Historians still argue whether this act was symbolic, offering water to the air in exchange for rain, or practical, perhaps meant to release humidity into the immediate area. Either way, it feels like a promise in motion. A small boy steps forward, with a branch of dried sage which the rain-caller lights from an ember in a clay brazier. The smoke curls upward, carrying its sharp, earthy scent across the circle. She waves it slowly in the 4 cardinal directions, her lips moving silently. You can almost convince yourself the smoke drifts more willingly toward the horizon where those faint gray clouds have thickened. Then come the stones. One by one, she sets them in a loose spiral around the basin, the painted swirls facing upward. They're not placed randomly. Each one goes down with a moment's pause, as though she's listening for some inaudible cue. You hear a whisper behind you from an elderly woman, explaining that the spiral confuses the dry winds, making them hesitate long enough for the rain clouds to move in. It's a charming theory, whether meteorologically sound or not. Once the spiral is complete, the people step forward and turn. Each offers something small, a pinch of grain, a flower petal, a coin, even a few stray feathers. The items are placed into the basin, where they float or sink depending on their weight. The sight is oddly beautiful, bright, flecks of color bobbing. In the water, tiny offerings, suspended in the moment. As you watch, faint breeze stirs, and somewhere above, a bird calls in a low, thrumming tone. The sound feels different here, less like a random note in nature, and more like an answer. The rain-caller pauses mid-motion, head tilting toward the sky. For just a second, she smiles. The rest of the day unfolds slowly. The villagers don't speak much about the ritual once it's done, but you can sense its presence in every small movement. A man repairing his roof hums the same melody the rain caller used in her chants. Children trace spiral shapes in the dirt with sticks. Women hanging laundry glance upward, more often than they look at their work. By late afternoon, the clouds on the horizon have drawn closer. Their undersides tinged with the faintest green. The air feels thicker now, clinging to your skin, and the distant rumble of something wind, perhaps, or maybe the first growl of thunder rolls lazily toward you. You catch the rain caller watching that edge of the sky with the patient intensity of someone who has spent her whole life reading its moods. As the light begins to fade, the village gathers once more in the central space. This time, there's no table, no basin, just people standing shoulder to shoulder, their eyes on the sky. The silence feels like a held breath. Somewhere in the crowd, someone mutters about how the clouds are listening, and no one disagrees. A cool gust brushes your cheek. You look up in time to see a single, isolated drop of water land on the packed dirt at your feet, darkening it in a perfect circle. It's not the storm yet, but it's a beginning. By twilight, the air has that charged hush that makes even insects reconsider their schedules. A small drum begins somewhere behind you, soft at first, as if it's asking permission of the dust. It answers by lifting itself in slow puffs from the ground, like flour catching breath before it rises. The rain caller steps into the clearing, but she doesn't take the center. Tonight belongs to feet. Barefoot villagers drift in from every lane, skirts knotted at the hip, trouser legs rolled, anklets whispering. The anklets are half music, half message. Dried seed pods that rattle like distant showers, shells that click like pebbles rolled by a brook. Slivers of polished gourd that knock together with the warm sound of raindrops on a wooden roof. A girl twirls once to test the music she's wearing and grins when it answers. The drum deepens to a heart-slow tempo, and a flute threads through a thin silver line that wanders like water, finding the easiest way down. Two elders chalk a broad spiral on the packed earth, beginning where the basin had sat this morning and unfurling outward in a patient coil. The spiral isn't for decoration, but it's a path. A reminder that not everything arrives in straight lines. Joke 1. You consider lobbying for a straight line rain because it sounds faster. But you know better than to heckle the sky. Mainstream historical fact steps forward with its sensible sandals. Communities across the world have danced for rain for millennia. In the American Southwest, certain Pueblo ceremonies braid song, movement, and masked prayer into petitions for clouds. In the Balkans, the Dodala ritual sends a flower-crowned girl from door to door while neighbors splash water over her. In parts of sub-Saharan Africa, rattles, ankle bells, and dust-kicking patterns join drumming to wake the sky. Whatever the costume, the grammar repeats. Feet mark the rhythm. Voices braid the air, and the body becomes a letter addressed. Upward, the first dancers begin clockwise along the chalked spiral, steps small and deliberate. Heels press, toes lift, a soft stamp, then a slide, as if they are drawing clouds with their souls. At each turn of the chalk, a different rhythm asserts. It's self-thrum, pause thrum, then trills of heel taps like a sudden wind across tall grass. The raincaller stands at the edge with her indigo tunic loosened, palms facing outward, coaxing rather than commanding. You can almost see the pattern forming, a choreography that mimics the way a storm gathers, circling, condensing, choosing. A center dust begins to learn the shapes, rising with each stamp and settling into whispery swirls. A boy trails the line with a gourd ladle, flicking spoonfuls of water across the path so the dust clumps in tiny constellations. As the dancers pass, their feet smear and connect those wet freckles into wisps like the bellies of forming clouds. The gourd makes a hollow plop with each flick. Joke 2. The sound belongs on a relaxation app. 10 hours of gentle plop for sleep. Second circle forms counterclockwise, elders moving with the economy of people who know exactly how much effort the sky requires. Their hands rise and fall in slow arcs, fingers splayed to resemble fat drops. Between the circles, children skip in a jagged line. Their steps are rhythmic in the way that makes patterns breathe. They carry little bundles of grass tied with blue thread, which they shake over their heads, so the blades tremble like rain curtains. Historians still argue whether the steps you're seeing are ancient forms preserved intact or reconstructions, layered with newer gestures. Dances travel, they borrow, they shed. One village's drought year becomes another's festival step a century later. To the people moving now, the debate is beside the point. Their feet remember, and remembering is half the spell. The drum adds a second voice. Someone has flipped a pot and found it agreeable. A woman near you claps on the offbeat, pushing the rhythm forward like a shoulder nudging a stuck cart. Another hands you a coil of ankle seeds and nods at your shoes. You hesitate, then slip them off. The ground is cooler than you expected. Cool enough to convince you the air has changed its mind about the evening. The anklets feel like friendly weight. When you move, they answer with a polite chatter. There is a sequence you begin to recognize, for stamps. A sway, a turning of the left palm skyward, as if to catch what hasn't started falling. Then a slow bend, knees soft, hands toward the ground and acknowledgement that the gift you ask for returns to the soil. 2 hands or buckets alone. With each repetition, the dust cloud thickens until it becomes a visible veil around the dancers. A sketch of vapor that can't help but think about becoming cloud. Quirky Tidbit arrives with a wink from the edge of the circle. One of the elders wears a belt strung with tiny, hollowed frog bones that click together with each step. Frogs sing for storms, she says, when you raise an eyebrow. Let them sing, even when they're quiet. The sound is delicate, like porcelain wind chimes, and chills prickle along your forearms in spite of the heat. The frogs are here, whether the sky admits it or not. As the spiral tightens toward its center, the dancer's shoulders loosen. Someone starts a call and response that isn't words so much as syllables, shaped like distant thunder and ba. Ba low and patient. The rain caller answers with a higher phrase that skims the top of the sound like swallows over a pond. Your own breath finds the groove without asking you first. Breath is always applying for jobs it's not qualified for and then learning them. On the spot, a gust slips into the clearing and the dust veil lifts in a sheet, revealing the chalk spiral scuffed into soft edges. Over the rooftops, a single bird wheels against the dimming sky, then disappears into the gray bank that's been inching closer all afternoon. You feel it first on your ankles, a temperature drop, barely a coin's thickness of cool, but real. Enough to make the skin there tighten, heads tilt up without breaking the rhythm. The drum does not hurry. Mainstream fact folds itself into the moment. Stomping dances can kick particulate into the lowest layer of air, and moisture condenses on particles. People once believed the dust itself seeded clouds. Modern meteorology is coy about such claims at village scale, but no one here is measuring hardness of rain with instruments. What matters is that a body making sound on Earth feels like collaboration. And collaboration is often how weather happens to people and with them. You catch the rain caller checking the mint tucked at her sash. It still stands perky as a new thought. She unties it, kisses her thumb, and presses the leaf to the center of the spiral where the water basin had sat. A child solemnly places a blue thread beside it. It is the kind of tiny ceremony that would look foolish alone and becomes ancient in company. Quirky tidbit number 2. A pair of boys sprint to the well and back carrying sloshing mugs, tossing a fan of droplets outward at the edge of the circle, so the sky can practice. One misses his mark and baptizes his own toes. The other laughs so hard he loses the beat and invents a new one. The elders let the new rhythm live for 8 counts, then fold it back into the old like taking a small, excited river and showing it how to join the main flow. Joke 3. Congratulations. You just witnessed the first documented remix of a drought. As the light slides from copper to pewter, the dance slows. What began as stamping becomes rocking. What was petitioned becomes gratitude in advance. Balms. Stay turned upward longer between phrases. The dust settles by degrees, sketching the spiral in a soft graphite that wasn't there this morning. You realize your own feet have learned 2 or 3 of the patterns without permission. Muscle is a good student when the lesson is repetition. Historians still argue whether the efficacy of these dances lies in microclimate nudges, an embodied prayer that steadies a community until the rains return anyway, or in the psychological truth that shared movement sews people together for the hard work of endurance. The rain caller would likely say yes to all three, and also to a fourth, because the sky is a person. And persons respond to being noticed kindly, her smile suggests. Long experience arguing with weather, which makes her a diplomat of the rarest class, the drum softens to a heartbeat again. The dancers step off the spiral, leaving their last prints like the punctuation at the end of a patient letter. The anklets quiet. Seed pods, remember how to be seeds. Somewhere above the low roofs, a wind recombs the fields with a slow, sure hand. You tilt your face up and swear the air tastes different. You're in leaf, a promise cut with dust. No rain falls yet. The village does not sulk. People move away from the clearing without hurry, like readers closing a book whose story has turned toward the ending they hoped for. The spiral remains, chalk and scuff, a visible map of wanting. Tomorrow, if the sky delays, they'll dance again. Feet are a renewable resource, and hope has strong ankles. You dust your soles on the threshold stone as you step aside for an elder. With frog bone music at her belt, she nods approval, or maybe just acknowledgement that you kept time in the doorway. The rain caller hangs her indigo tunic by the brazier to dry from sweat, and lifts her face to the darkening east. Ask the question out loud. Neither do you. Some letters are better read by the addressee alone. By morning, the storm hasn't yet signed its attendance sheet. But the village moves with a kind of hushed anticipation, as though the air has passed along a secret that everyone knows but no one names. You follow the narrow path behind the elder's house, where an overgrown hedge arches over the trail like a conspirator leaning in to whisper. The ground is still patterned with yesterday's footprints, pressed into the dust like punctuation marks. Left in a half-finished sentence, the path leads to a low shed built from sun-bleached planks, the wood so warped it looks like it has been smiling for years. Inside, the smell is a strange duet, something earthy and herbal, like dried sage bundled in corners, braided together with the faint tang of metal and ash. This is where the tools for the other part of the ritual live. Not the dancing or the spiral, but the things meant to handle what shouldn't be here at all. Mainstream historical fact sidles in with a measured nod. Many ancient and early modern communities didn't draw a hard line between whether rituals and protective rites. Calling for rain often came with the implicit job of clearing away whatever malevolent spirit, cursed wind, or ill-intentioned glance might be preventing it. In other words, rainmaking and exorcism sometimes shared the same stage, even if they were billed as separate acts. You crouch near a low shelf lined with small clay jars, each sealed with a thick wax cap. The lids are stamped with patterns, some swirling like water, others jagged like lightning strikes. The rain caller, now wearing a saffron sash tied over one shoulder, lifts one jar and turns it in her palm. This one, she says, for the whispers in the wind. You ask what that means, but she just gestures toward the hills as though the answer is self-explanatory. Joke 1. You decide Whisperers in the Wind will be your next garage band name. The rain caller pulls out a bundle of sticks bound with red twine and sprigs of rosemary. She sets it beside a shallow iron bowl, already dusted with white. Ash from a previous fire? When the wind talks wrong, you correct its manners, she murmurs. You get the sense that the correction is not always polite. Quirky Tidbit steps in wearing a grin in parts of medieval Europe. People believed that certain storms were caused by witches milking clouds, stealing rain to sell to other villages. In such cases, the ritual might involve burning herbs, whose smoke was thought to confuse or block these thieves in the sky. Whether or not cloud milking was ever an actual practice, the image of someone standing on a hill with a bucket under a storm is the kind of surreal that sticks in the brain. The rain caller begins to lay out the tools, the bound sticks, the iron bowl, a twist of dried lavender, a skin of water, and a narrow strip of cloth marked with ink symbols you can't read. Historians still argue whether these symbols are remnants of a shared ancient script, or simply local shorthand that happened to look similar across regions. Whatever the origin, the marks feel deliberate, like a note you're not meant to open until the right moment. You help carry the bundle outside to a small stone platform that sits between the fields and the forest edge. The ground here has been swept clean, the surface etched with faint circles and crosses that time hasn't managed to erase. The rain-caller sprinkles a thin trail of water along the outer edge of the stone. For the good ones, she explains, so they'll stand close and watch. The iron bowl takes its place at the center, and she builds a small nest of twigs inside. The bound rosemary bundle rests on top, waiting. When she strikes flint to steel, the spark leaps up like it has been impatient all morning. Herbs catch with a pop, releasing smoke that twists into thin, urgent threads. You catch the scent, sharp and clean, like waking up in the middle of a pine forest after rain, as the smoke curls. The rain-caller begins a low chant, words too soft for you to catch individually, but steady enough to feel in your ribs. She walks, a slow circle around the bowl, occasionally pausing to tap the red-bound sticks against the stone. Each tap echoes faintly, as if the ground has a hollow chamber underneath. Joke 2. You briefly imagine a giant mole under there. Irritated at being woken mid-nap, she stops, dips the strip of marked cloth into the water skin, and wrings it out so droplets fall into the smoking bowl. The hiss is immediate, a sound, halfway between relief and protest. The smoke thickens and sinks, pooling low before spilling over the platform edge into the grass. You swear it moves in a particular direction, toward the hills where the whisperers supposedly live. Mainstream fact peeks in again. Anthropologists have recorded similar practices in regions from the Caucasus to Southeast Asia, where smoke was guided or sent toward the source of a problem, be it a storm, a pest swarm, or a haunting. The act was both symbolic declaring intent and practical, and that scented smoke can carry far on the wind, marking territory in a way invisible lines never could. The rain-caller hands you the bound sticks. Your turn, she says. You look down at them, wondering if there's a right or wrong way to tap. She tilts her head. You'll know. So you step onto the stone, circle the bowl, and let the sticks knock gently against the surface. The sound is more resonant than you expect would, meeting stone in a tone that seems to hang in the air longer than physics allows. You circle once, twice, then pass the sticks back. Quirky tidbit number 2 joins the scene. In some Pacific Island traditions, exorcism of harmful weather spirits involved physically escorting them out to sea with rhythmic tools paddles, drums, even lines of dancers facing away from shore. The idea was to give the spirit a path, because even troublemakers apparently need good directions. The smoke begins to thin, its sharp scent fading into the background smells of earth and grass. The rain-caller lets the last curl drift away, then tips the remaining water from the skin into the iron bowl. The hiss this time is softer, like a sigh at the end of a long day. She says nothing for a long moment, watching the damp ash cool. Finally, she nods. If they were here, they've gone. As you help pack up the tools, you notice the wind has shifted. It comes now from the west, carrying a different texture, cooler, smoother, without the dry static it had yesterday. Overhead, a faint smear of cloud stretches across the sky like someone has brushed watercolor onto pale parchment. The rain-caller smiles without looking at you. Now we see if the sky heard both parts of the story. You understand, the dance had been the letter. But this had been clearing the desk so the letter could be read without interruption. By late afternoon, the light goes sideways, taking on that smoky tint that makes edges look softer and intentions look complicated. Wind runs a careful finger along the eaves and then withdraws, as if testing the village for weak places. You notice how people glance not just at the sky now, but at each other quick, assessing looks that measure coughs, limps, and the color in a child's cheeks. It's not only the fields that need rain, bodies do too. And where there's a long dry spell, fevers tend to elbow their way in like rude guests. The rain-caller steps into the clearing with the same basket you've come to recognize: beads, feathers, the odd river stone. But tonight, there's a new weight to it, a heaviness you feel even before you see what's inside. She's wrapped a bundle in dark cloth, tied with a length of blue thread. The thread reminds you of yesterday's grass favors. This blue is deeper, like dusk held taut. She unties the knot and reveals a narrow clay figure with a pinched waist, and a face that is more suggestion than portrait. 2 indents for eyes, 1 for a mouth. It's not meant to look like anyone in particular. It's meant to look like the thing no one invites. Mainstream historical fact arrives with a steady lantern. Many ancient communities paired rain rites with apotropaic ceremonies to counter. Sickness spirits, Mesopotamian Aipu, recited incantations over figurines that carried illness away. In ancient Greece, small effigies were sometimes dedicated to gods of healing during outbreaks. In parts of East and West Africa, communal cleansing and rain petitions intertwined, the same drumming calling clouds and clearing harm, no sharp. Borders separated weather and health. A dry wind could parch crops and lungs. A storm could cleanse fields and fever alike. The rain caller sets the clay figure at the center of the spiral. You danced last night. The chalk is faint now, scuffed and softened into a pale galaxy of dust, but the path still holds. She places 3 river stones at the figure's feet, the same spiraled kind she used to puzzle the wind, and then lays the mint sprig across its chest. The mint is tired but not collapsed upright enough to suggest that patience, like herbs, has a stem. She speaks plainly to the figure. No chant, no theatrical weight. If you are hunger, if you are fever, if you are the shadow that stands at doors, go, take this path out. She taps the spiral with the red-bound sticks. Each tap notched to a rhythm you recognize from the dance 4 beats in a breath. 4 beats in a breath. This is not an exorcism with rattling chains. It's more like firm housekeeping. Joke 1. Shoo. Shadow has big broom energy. A small crowd gathers. But they keep their distance, as if proximity might persuade the wrong guest to stay. An elder with the frogbone belt stands beside you, hands folded, eyes steady. She murmurs, "Spirits like edges. We walk them first." With that, a line of villagers begins tracing the spiral outward. Not dancing this time, just walking heel to toe. Heel to toe, shoulders angled so that their bodies form a moving fence. Where the path widens, 2 people walk side by side. Where it narrows near the center, they flow single file past the clay figure. Eyes soft, mouth set. Quirky tidbit wanders in wearing a faint smile. Some traditions used bells with deliberately. Cracked mouths for cleansing, writes the broken tone, was thought to unsettle whatever clung. The way a sour note ruins a song for an uninvited listener. Here, a boy carries a bell you noticed in the meeting house. Its ring a little frayed around the edges, and he strikes it lightly each time someone passes the figure. The sound is imperfect and therefore apparently persuasive. Historians still argue whether these effigies were considered temporary bodies for a nebulous illness, decoys that attracted bad fortune, or just a communal focus that helped people name what scared them. The scholarship splits like a river. One branch flows toward symbolism, another toward spirit literalism, a third toward social psychology, the calm that arrives when fear has a place to sit that isn't your chest. The rain caller would likely shrug and say, "If the house is cleaner and the fever breaks, choose any explanation you like." She lifts the clay figure and presses its cool heft into your hands for a moment. It's heavier than it looks. The spirals painted on its belly catch a thread of evening light. "Walk," she says, nodding down the path. So you do slow steps. Along the chalk ghost, the clay warming against your palms. At the spiral's first wide turn, a woman meets you and lays a blue thread across the figure's shoulders. At the second, someone tucks a strip of linen under its arm. At the third, the boy with the bell rings once, then again. It feels less like theater than like a relay in which the baton is the town's worry. Joke 2. You are, briefly, an anxiety courier, no tips necessary, at the outermost loop. Where the spiral turns into straight ground, a shallow trench awaits. Lined with green branches and a little mound of ash from yesterday's smoke, the raincaller receives the figure back, rests it in the trench, and sprinkles it with water. Not much, just enough to darken the clay and wake its scent. Hatchie. Plants the mint beside it, then covers both with a lattice of twigs tied with blue. The lattice looks like a door made of small decisions. Mainstream. Fact returns to point out that burying or sinking such figures under thresholds, at field edges, even at river bends, shows up and digs the world over. Sometimes the figures are spiked with nails or pins a different register of insistence. Sometimes inscribed with go marks, sometimes left unadorned. Here, gentleness rules. The message is emphatic without being cruel. You have a path. Use it. The wind shifts again, smoother now. And with it comes a smell that has been circling all week like a rumor finally ready to be confirmed. Iron, leaf, and that damp stone note that doesn't belong to dew. You feel it on your arms first. Tiniest pimpling, as if your skin has stepped into a cooler room. Heads tilt up. No one speaks. The boy forgets to ring the bell. Doesn't need to. Somewhere out beyond the fields, thunder clears its throat like a bashful guest who arrived early and waited in the lane. But the rite isn't quite done. Raincaller takes a strip of cloth marked with those ink sigils and ties it high on the meeting house door where the chalk loops once glowed. So anything that lingers will remember the way out, she says. She lifts the cracked-mouthed bell herself and rings a slow pattern 3. Pause, 2, pause, 1, mysticably. Farewell. Joke 3. Even shadows appreciate a clear checkout policy. Historians still argue whether the emotional tide of such ceremonies fear acknowledged. Given form, then dismissed contributes to real recovery in times of sickness. Placebo is a poor word here. It sounds like a trick and misses the labor, the walking, the weaving, the keeping of watch. What you see tonight is a community practicing alignment bodies, breath, intentions, so that if rain does come, they're all ready together to receive it. If it doesn't, they are all ready together to endure. Either way, togetherness is medicine. As dusk thickens, the first drop lands on the lattice with a sound so small it could be imagined.
Ow.
Then another finds the mint and beads there like a pearl. The frog bone belt gives the faintest click, unbothered, almost amused, as if the frogs have decided to delegate. The boy finally remembers the bell and gives it a single, careful ring, less an alarm than a thank you note. Somewhere behind you, someone laughs once in that relieved way that makes the laugh sound like a sob's happier cousin. More drops fall, spaced widely at first, like someone upstairs learning to play a gentle drum. The raincaller doesn't look. At the sky, she watches the trench, the tiny door of twigs, the darkening clay. When the figure gleams, slicked by enough water to blur the spiral on its belly, she nods. Not triumph. Not even satisfaction. Just acknowledgement, the same look she gave the smoke when it went the right direction. You tilt your face up and accept a handful of cool coins from the sky. They dapple your cheeks, your wrists, the soft insides of your elbows. The dirt gives. Off that first holy breath of petrichor, and the village exhales so deeply that even the fences seem to relax. The shadow has been shown the path. The rain has been shown the door. The wind freshens. The bell is quiet now. The blue thread at the meeting house lifts once, twice, then presses itself against the wood like a signature drying. The rain doesn't rush in like a gossip who's been holding back all night. Tiptoes, polite as an uninvited guest who's decided to earn their keep. The drops stay soft, fat enough to make little thup sounds on thatched roofs, but not. So many that you can't count them if you feel like making an evening of it. You stand under the overhang of the meeting house and let your eyes wander across the common. Small rivulets already trace familiar lines in the dirt. Finding the quickest paths as if they've rehearsed this moment for months, the villagers have split into quiet knots, some tending fires that will sputter and catch again, some tilting their faces to drink from the air. The frogbone belt's owner has perched on a stool, eyes half closed, tapping out a rhythm that somehow fits between raindrops. It's the sound of patience paying interest. Rain calling in most ancient traditions didn't end with the first wet touch of weather. Mainstream historical fact shuffles in like a well-meaning archivist. In West African rainmaking ceremonies, particularly among the Dagara and other groups, The first rain was only stage 1. Follow-up rituals ensured that the storm would settle in nourishing crops instead of slipping away. Similarly, in the Andes, Inca ceremonies paired the calling with anchoring rites to convince clouds to linger in valleys rather than fleeing to the mountains. Here, the rain caller starts. The anchoring almost without announcement, she produces a shallow wooden bowl and places it just beyond the eaves where drops can plink into it without splashing mud. Beside it, she sets a second empty bowl inside a ring of smooth stones. You've seen enough of her patterns now to guess. One bowl will receive, one will remind. She kneels, scoops water from the first bowl, and pours it into the second, slow as syrup, lips moving in a hush too low for words to resolve. Then she reverses the motion, pouring back. It looks absurdly simple, like the world's least ambitious cooking show, but the villagers watch as if she's translating rain into a dialect the earth remembers. Joke 1. You suspect the recipe is just add water, but you keep it to yourself. Quirky Tidbit joins the scene wearing a poncho of pure oddity in parts of Mongolia. Herders believed you could encourage continued rain by feeding it a drizzle, was given drops of milk, ladled gently from a spoon into puddles, on the theory that the sky, like a young animal, would linger if nourished. You half expect someone here to fetch a cup of goat milk, but instead, a girl skips forward with a bundle of rosemary and tips it into the water bowl before laying it across the stone ring. Historians still argue whether such anchoring was meant to affect weather directly or simply to give people the sense that they had done their part, removing helplessness from the equation. One camp insists on meteorological manipulation, another on psychological comfort. A rain caller probably leans toward both. Why choose when your day's work can serve the sky and the mind at once? The wind shifts again, bringing with it the scent of the fields beyond the village, rich, loamy, relieved. You picture the dust settling on each blade of grain like a truce flag. The rain caller stands and walks the perimeter of the common, sprinkling from the bowl onto fence posts, door lintels, and the base of the big sycamore. Each sprinkle is followed by a tiny press of her fingers into the wet wood or bark, as if to seal the deal. That's when you notice a pattern. She's marking the same places where you saw protective charms earlier in the weak bundles of twigs, feathers, carved stones. The rain, in this telling, isn't just for the crops. It's a visitor that needs an introduction to the neighbors, the protective spirits, the invisible fences that keep the village's unseen life orderly. In the corner of the square, two boys are building a little dam of sticks and mud to divert a rivulet toward a patch of thirsty herbs. You watch them work, serious faces, messy hands, and wonder if this is how all rituals begin. A problem, two willing participants, and some improvisation. Joke 2. Congratulations, you've just witnessed the youngest civil engineers in history. As the light dims, the anchoring rite gains another layer. Circle forms, and villagers begin passing a single, slightly dented brass cup from hand to hand. Each person takes a sip of rainwater collected from the first bowl. Some close their eyes, others wink at friends. You take your turn and find it surprisingly cold, with a faint mineral bite that could be from the roof tiles or the air itself. Mainstream fact sidles in again to remind you water-sharing rituals often doubled as social contracts. In ancient Polynesia, participants drank from a communal vessel during peace treaties, symbolizing shared life and future cooperation. Here, the subtext is less political and more neighborly. If we drink the same rain, we share its fate. The rain caller makes one final circuit with the brass cup and pours the remaining water onto the clay figure's resting place in the trench. It darkens again, almost greedily, the spiral now nearly invisible. She nods once. The crowd exhales, a sound you're beginning to recognize as this village's version of applause. And then, because weather has a sense of humor, the rain thickens. It's still gentle, but the drops arrive closer together, the spaces between them shrinking until the thatch hums under their percussion. The frog-bone rhythm fades out, placed by the more confident drumming of the sky. Quirky Tidbit makes a quick encore in rural Japan. Some farmers used to whistle softly into jars during anchoring rituals, the echo said to call more drops. One of the boys near the herb patch tries it now, his jar producing a faint, ghostly note. You can't tell if it works, but you do see the rain caller smile at the sound. Historians still argue whether anchoring rituals emerged independently in disparate cultures or spread through ancient trade and migration routes. The gestures, the sprinkling, the shared drinking, the marking of boundaries are strikingly similar from continent to continent. Perhaps rain, like hunger and song, inspires convergent invention. The night folds in gently, lanterns lighting up one by one around the square. The villagers don't disperse entirely. They linger, chatting under eaves, testing the puddles with bare toes. Somewhere a pot is set to boil, the steam carrying a promise of soup. You stay a while longer, letting the rain beat in your hair and trickle along your collar. The bowls still sit under the eaves, one filling, one waiting, like punctuation marks. At the end of a sentence, you're not ready to finish. Joke 3. You think about taking the bowls home to keep the rain for later? But suspect the sky has a strict no doggy bag policy. When you finally turn toward your own door, the path is different, softened, darkened, bordered by little channels where the water runs like quicksilver snakes. The air is cleaner, the ground richer, and somewhere above the clouds a moon waits for its own turn at center stage. For now, though, the rain has the floor. By midnight the rain has gentled into a steady whisper, the kind that slicks the world into soft focus and makes roofs purr. Lanterns dwindle one by one until the village holds only a few warm eyes against the dark. You expect people to drift? To sleep? But a small procession forms instead, quiet bodies, with shawls pulled close, feet careful on the new dark earth. The rain caller leads, indigo damp at the hem, Frogbone elder at her side, the boy with the cracked-mouthed bell, carefully silent for once. You fall in behind them because this is clearly a part of the story that happens after bedtime. They take the footpath toward the low ridge east of the fields, where basalt shoulders lift out of the soil like patient animals. You felt the place. Earlier in the week, without knowing a tan echo, you couldn't name a hush that seemed to be listening back. Tonight, water threads the rock faces in silver seams. The ground holds a black gloss where puddles consider their futures. When the group reaches a shallow bowl in the stone, everyone settles along its rim. The raincaller steps into the center, sets down a big, wide belly jar, tips it on its side so the mouth faces the rock. Mainstream historical fact arrives with a quiet reverence across the world. Ritual sound has recruited stone and clay. As collaborators, Indian priests blew Putatu conch trumpets into canyon walls, so the valley answered. In India, the Shanka spiral carried vows to gods and sometimes requests for monsoon mercy. Bull roars in Australia hummed low thunder into the air on chords. Pueblo Kivas turned chants circular so the room itself became a drum. Rainmaking and exorcism both learned early that a voice, multiplied by rock, is harder for sky and spirit to ignore. The raincaller doesn't blow a shell. She cups her hands around the jar's lip and speaks not words you recognize, but syllables that hang like beads on a string. O Halim. The sound lifts across whetstone, folds into itself, and returns as a layered murmur, like a crowd agreeing. It isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. The rock is doing half the work. Joke 1. You realize this is the village's version of calling customer support. Press 1 for drizzle, 2 for cleansing, 3 to leave a message. After the thunder, she tries another phrase, shorter. The echo comes back with a tiny wobble, as if the ridge is smiling. The boy with the bell cannot help himself. He ghost rings it with his thumb. No clapper, just metal whispering metal. The raincaller tilts the jar a fraction, and the echo changes shape less, more as though the ridge and the pot are taking turns being mouth and throat. Historians still argue whether jars like this were built for ritual acoustics or pressed into service from everyday vessels. Archaeologists keep finding sounding vases. It's built into ancient and medieval structures, clay urns, bricked into church walls or theater benches, and the debate is lively. Were they tuning devices improving resonance? Or apotropaic traps, meant to catch wayward spirits in a clay belly? Some texts praise their harmonics, others speak of bottling voices. The truth, untidy as usual, may be both. Better sound for prayers, and fewer things interrupting them. The rain caller raises a hand and the frog-bone elder steps forward. Instead of her belt, she carries a hollow reed. She lays one end against the jar's lip and hums. The jar answers with a deeper tone, like the throat of a sleeping animal. Together, they lean the sound into the rock until the rock swallows it and returns to notes slightly out of sync. The edges of your skin lift. You didn't know stone could do it. Quirky Tidbit leans in with a grin. In some mountain villages, people used to teach certain cliffs their names. On a dry year's night, they'd call the name into the stone. If the echo came back twice, rain tomorrow. Thrice, rain by midweek. No echo. Keep the jars covered. It's as good a forecast as any you've met this week. The man beside you, hat dripping, quietly tries his own name into his cupped hands. The rock gives him one polite syllable back, like a wink. The rain caller shifts to a sequence you recognize. For slow pulses, a breath. 2 quick notes, a breath. It's the dance's heartbeat translated into air and stone. The echo stacks. The pulses like flat river rocks. Thump, 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 hush, tap, tap, hush. A child giggles once, then covers her mouth, as if she's been caught talking to the weather with her outside voice. Joke 2. You consider whisper shouting, "Are we on speaker?" But the rock already is. Mainstream fact, this time in library. Voice. The Mocha and other Andean cultures crafted whistling vessels, paired chamber ceramics that sang when poured, their notes rising and falling with the water's breath. Scholars think some mimicked wind or rain, others the calls of birds that heralded storms. Pour, whistle, echo, an instrument that also waters itself. Tonight's jar can't whistle on its own, but the rain caller coaxes a similar effect. She pours a little water into it, tilts, and draws a tone as the liquid lip changes the mouth's shape. The ridge answers like a low cloud petting the hill. Historians still argue whether these night rituals sought confirmation, conversation, or command. The echo the spirit's reply, a test of the cliff's mood, a way to reassure wary hearts that someone or something was listening. Ask the people seated in the wet dark now, and they might say all three. The echo proves the world is not empty. The tone proves the world is in tune. The act proves they are not merely waiting, but participating. The rain thickens to a velvet that makes the rock gleam. A trickle finds the bowl's floor and becomes a thread that sings in miniature where it drops. The rain caller jar tucked against her hip calls one last phrase for notes that rise like a question and end like a suggestion. The ridge sends them back softened, as if the stone has added a kindly accent. She lowers the jar and rests her palm on the wet basalt. The gesture looks exactly like greeting a neighbor at the fence. Quirky, Tidbit pads in wearing house slippers. There's a superstition in some places that wells remember voices. People once told secrets into them to keep them cool, the way you might stash letters in a drawer. Later, when drought cracked patience and soil alike, they'd return and ask the well to repeat the secret back proof that the world still held their words and might. Therefore, hold rain. The rain caller bows her head toward the puddle and speaks so quietly you hear only a shape of sound. The puddle, for its part, keeps the secret. Around the rim of the bowl, the village breathes together. No chant now, no drum, just breath, which turns out to be its own instrument when enough people play it at once. Your inhale meets a dozen others. Your exhale returns as a soft, unanimous she, the exact sound roofs are making under the weather's fingers. You feel the old spiral under your soles, even though it's not chalked here. Paths once learned travel with you. The boy finally rings. The bell one true, cracked note that pops like a bubble and vanishes. It's less announcement than punctuation. Rain caller nods and tips the jar upright. Water patters into it, a gentle applause. She corks it with a twist of oiled cloth and ties the jar with blue thread. For the morning, she says, rain. That remembers it was welcome. Joke 3. Somewhere, a cloud is filling out a comment card. Service. Attentive. Ambience echoey would precipitate again. On the way back, the procession stretches into a lazy line. Mud has changed everyone's gait into the same careful choreography, a village-wide slow dance. The elder with the reed carries it like a candle. The boy keeps his bell in both hands, as if it might decide to clap on its own. You pass the meeting house and see the marked cloth still lifting and settling on the doorframe like a breathing thing. In the trench by the field's edge, the clay figure gleams dark. The mint leans under a pearl chain of drops and looks. For once, satisfied at your threshold, you rest a hand on the lintel where the rain-caller pressed water earlier. The wood is wet and cool, the grain puffed up like a pleased cat. Inside, the roof ticks softly as swollen reeds resettle in their weave. The echo from the ridge lingers in your ears, the sense that words sent out can come back kinder. You tip your head and hear faintly the jar's last note tucked under the rain's steady music, as if the night has learned a new harmony and intends to keep it. When you lie down, the dark is not empty. It's populated with returns, the echo. Soft as a second thought, the breath that answers breath, the rain that answers dust. Somewhere on the ridge, the rock holds the shape of a syllable a little longer than stone should. Morning will ask for proof, and there will be a jar tied with blue to offer it. For now, the sky has the conversation well in hand, and the house, grateful student, copies every line. By dawn, the rain has slipped away like a guest who leaves before breakfast, polite enough not to wake you with the door. The air is rinsed to that rare clarity where each leaf edge looks outlined in silver, and every smell wet soil mint bruised. Under droplets, the faint mineral of the ridge is sharp enough to taste. You step outside into the pale wash of early light, and there it is. The jar from last night tied with its thread of blue, hiding at the threshold like a parcel you forgot you ordered. The cloth stopper is damp. It's not tighter from the rains. Own weight. The rain caller is already in the lane, hair bound up, skirts dry for the first time in days. She's carrying another jar under one arm, empty this time, and greets you with the kind of nod that says, "The rest is your job now." She doesn't linger. There are others to visit, other thresholds to bless. Watch her go and remember the slow procession up the ridge, the hum through stone. The echo that felt like the earth's half-dashed smile, mainstream historical fact takes. A seat beside you on the step, anthropologists have documented countless rituals. Where water gathered after rain was believed to hold special potency. In rural Japan, a mizu, collected from temple roofs, was sprinkled in fields to ensure future storms. In some Slavic traditions, first rain water washed over amulets before they were worn in planting season. The logic was almost chemical-like. Charging a battery? Accept your battery as the whole landscape. You loosen the thread, careful not to spill a drop. Inside, the water looks unremarkable. But when you pour a little into your palm, it feels warmer than it should, like it's kept. A tiny ember from last night's song. You tip it into a wooden bowl and set it on the sill, where sunlight can wander through it. The light makes the surface ripple as if the water is remembering the ridge's voice. Joke 1. You half expect it to start whispering weather reports, partly. Cloudy chants of Dacia Vu. A few neighbors arrive with their own jars, each sealed in its own way. Leather caps, tied leaves, carved wooden plugs. They place them together on the meeting house steps. Someone fetches a ladle and dips from one jar into another, mixing the contents slowly until every vessel has tasted every other. So the rain knows all our names, a woman says, not as a metaphor, but as fact. Quirky tidbit ambles in with muddy boots. In certain Andean villages, rainwater gathered in communal basins was believed to be an excellent liar detector. Suspected oathbreaker would rinse their hands in it. If the water coiled away from the skin instead of clinging, the verdict was guilty. You look at the jars now, their surface is calm. Decide you're not in the mood for trial by drizzle. The mixing finished, people carry their jars back. 2 doorways, 2 fields, to the shallow pits dug between rows of beans. The frogbone elder dribbles hers over a carved stone set into her garden. The boy with the cracked bell pours his onto a stump and watches the dark ring bloom outwards. You take your own share to the field's edge and let it go onto the thirsty soil. The earth drinks without hesitation. Historians still argue whether these final acts of the sharing, the spreading, were originally practical irrigation measures, dressed in ceremony or symbolic gestures meant to keep the pact with the sky visible and mutual. Maybe they were both, a way to water the first sprouts while also telling the clouds, we noticed and we're grateful and we're ready for. Next time, the day swells with brightness. Chickens patrol the lanes, their feathers jeweled with leftover drops. Laundry reappears on lines lifted in the breeze like flags announcing a small victory. You pass the ridge path and glance up at the basalt bowl, though you can't see it from here. Still, you have the distinct impression it is listening, storing, humming under its breath. Joke 2. You imagine it filing last night under customer satisfaction. High. Children draw spirals in the damp dust with sticks, playing at being the dancers you watched. A girl presses her finger into the center of her spiral and declares it the spot where rain sleeps. Her friend adds a second spiral beside it, this one for chasing away bad dreams. You realize the two rituals, rain calling and exorcism, have more in common than not. Both are about sweeping spaces clean, whether the space is the sky or the inside of your chest. By afternoon, the scent of wet earth is replaced by that warm, rising smell of sun on grass. The mint by the trench is straightened. The clay figures half hidden now by leaves, eager to reclaim their height. You think about all the places in the world where rituals like this have folded into memory steps forgotten. Words blurred, only the shape of the gathering left. Sometimes they vanish completely. Sometimes they wait for a drought of any kind weather. Spirit courage to bring them out again. Quirky tidbit returns for a curtain call in some West African communities. Rainwater from the first storm after a funeral is kept in a gourd and used to wash the hands of mourners a year later. The act seals the mourning period, as if saying, we've watered this grief enough. Now let's plant something new. You hold that thought alongside the image of your jar on the sill, light drifting through it, rain already turning from memory into potential. The sky stays clear into evening, but the village carries itself like the rain is still here, voices lower, movements slower, as though preserving the quiet part of the storm. Lanterns bloom one by one, casting circles where people sit and talk. Someone starts humming the four-pulse, two-tap rhythm. You find yourself joining in, low and steady, without thinking. The sound fits the night exactly like it's been shaped. For it later at your door, you tie the blue thread back around the empty jar. Not because it needs sealing, but because it feels right to close the ritual the way it began. The jar is lighter now, but you swear there's still an echo in it, folded small. You set it inside, where the roof will keep it dry until it's called for again. The rain will come back someday, unprompted or invited. But you'll remember this: the echo on the ridge, the spiral underfoot, the shared water cooling in a bowl. The way the night turned a request into an answer you could hear, hold, and pour back into the world. Joke 3. Next time you might just try ordering sunshine and see if the ridge offers a loyalty discount. And with that, the day settles into the kind of quiet that doesn't need coaxing. The blue thread rests easy against the jar's neck. Somewhere, the rock is still humming, and if you listen closely, really closely, you might catch the faintest sound of rain rehearsing. The night folds over you now like a slow-moving tide. Warm where it touches, cool in the shadows. You picture the ridge, basalt shoulders against. A moonlit sky holding the memory of voices poured into jars, of syllables returned softer than they were sent. That memory seeps outward, settling over fields, slipping between rooftops, winding its way down to where you sit. The air feels thicker, not with rain, but with the calm that follows it, a calm so complete you can almost hear your own pulse, sinking to the distant rhythm of water, finding its way underground. You imagine each drop curling into soil, carrying the echo with it, so that somewhere deep below, the earth hums back to the sky. Breath slows, shoulders drop, you let the last fragments of light dissolve into the grain of your doorway, into the cooling earth, into the curve of your jar resting quietly inside. The blue thread is a simple loop now, but it holds an entire night's conversation, ready to be untied when needed. eyes close. The ridge is there. The rain is there. And so are you, part of the long, unbroken chain of calling and answering, of giving and receiving, of quiet, patient waiting. Sleep comes the way rain comes slow at first, then all at once, until you're carried.